We have two very impressive and knowledgeable education panelists here to speak with you. We have Valerie and we have Rob. Uh,
Hello, everybody.
so they are both different backgrounds. They both have different expertise. They are both in different fields.
My name is Valerie Tobias. Thank you so much for having me, Miss Dawn, Miss Dale. I really appreciate all of you guys, having me. Um, I just to give you a little bit of background about myself. I am an English teacher, so I teach middle school. So I've taught sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, but my teaching license does go up until 12th grade. So I'm eligible to teach grade 7 to 12. I love where I work. I've been teaching for 5 years. This June, I'll be finishing up my 5th year as a teacher. I went to the College of Staten Island for my bachelor's degree. So I did all my undergraduate studies at CSI, and my bachelor's degree is in English literature. So a majority of the classes that I took as an undergraduate were English classes. I took both American and British literature. But at CSI, the English major is kind of like a big umbrella. And then there's three subcategories that you can choose from. So my concentration is in literature, but you could also have majored in writing at CSI or linguistics. So my specialty is literature, and you have to want to make a positive impact on not just the kids, but on the future generations, because we are raising the future. When you're a teacher, you are putting the future out into the world, and what they learn in your classroom is really going to help them, be the best version of themselves, not just in middle school, but in high school and college and so on and so forth. So I know I've said a lot. I do have a bad habit of talking a lot. So I'm going to pause, and I'm going to give you guys the opportunity to ask me any questions that you may have about teaching or about the job, the profession, or maybe there's just something you want to know about teachers. So whatever you would like to know, I'm an open book. Ask away.
So how do you know like what major you're doing as a teacher?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
So how do you know like what major you're doing as a teacher? Like let's
Oh,
say,
so you mean, is your question like, how do you determine what you want to teach? Is that your
yeah.
question? Okay. That's a really good question. I think that it really depends on what you feel you're good at. I was always a very conscientious student. I was someone that enjoyed going to school, and English was always my strong suit. I always enjoyed, writing and reading and responding to the literature and discussing the literature. So I didn't always know I wanted to be an English teacher. When I was younger, I knew that I wanted to be a teacher when I was about 11 or 12. That was something that, I came to the determination of. But then I didn't know exactly what type of teacher I wanted to be. So I went through school. I kept going through school, going through the public school system, just like you are right now. Um, and it wasn't until I got to high school that I really determined that English was what I wanted to teach. And eventually, when I did become a teacher, I took bits and pieces of what I saw from teachers that I had, and I created my persona as a teacher. And everything I do is like a hat nod to the teachers that I've had, because that's how much of an influence they had on me. And that's the same type of influence that I hope to have on my students. And it passes on from generation to generation. And that's why this work is so important.
Question in the chat that says, how could you get your license in more than one state?
Okay.
And then there's another question that says, can you get a teaching job with a bachelor's degree?
Okay. So for the first question, how could you get your license in more than one state? Now, there are some states that have what's called reciprocal licensing. So what that means is that when you get licensed in a state like New York, that license, that New York license, is also valid in another state. So we have a partnership with Jersey. So if you get a license here in New York, that license is also valid in Jersey. But now let's say I want to move across the country to California, right? I would now have to get relicensed in the state of California because my license wouldn't be recognized in California because it's a New York license. So now each state has its own, process for teacher certification. So the process that we have in New York might not be the same process that California or any of the Western states have. So it really depends on, where you're looking to go from New York. And for the second question, can you get a teaching job with a bachelor's degree? 100% yes, you can. I got hired with a bachelor's degree, and then I was working toward my master's degree while I was teaching full time. So, which now I just realized I forgot to talk about my bachelor's degree, my master's degree, sorry, when I was introducing myself before. So my bachelor's is in English literature from CSI, and then my master's degree is in English adolescent education from Brooklyn College.
As you know, there is a teacher shortage. How do you manage the burden that comes with having more students?
That's an excellent question, and I'm so happy that you're hyper aware of the current events and how these current events have really impacted teachers. It's definitely been very difficult. My school in particular has an issue with, shortage of teachers because we have a disproportionate amount of teachers who are on site versus teachers who are fully remote. So those teachers who are fully remote don't come into the building at all. But then there are teachers like myself who are on-site teachers, and there's not enough of us. There's more people that are remote and less of us, which means that the work that is being done in the school building becomes all the more harder for the people that are in the building like me. And just to give you guys a little bit of a taste of how difficult that actually has been for me this year. Um, when I went back in September in preparation for the students to come back, which originally that was supposed to be in September, but then the mayor pushed it to October. So for that whole month of September, I was in a classroom by myself doing remote learning on top of going to the professional development meetings that I had to go to. But when I got my program, now I'm like I told you, I just got done talking about how I'm an English teacher and I have an English license and that's all I teach. But when I got my program this year, those shortages impacted what I was going to teach. Even though I have a license in English, unfortunately, this is a global pandemic, and your license is not really the first thing they consider when they're doing the programming. They do the programming based on where there is a need and what needs to be done and how it needs to be handled and who's going to be the best person to handle it. So pandemic or not, you guys are all we care about, and we just want you to be successful and we want you to have the best opportunities. So that's what I've been doing, and I miss teaching English something terrible. I feel like a part of my soul is missing, and that's been really hard for me emotionally to deal with because I love my subject and I love what I teach. So again, a loaded question, but that's how I'm handling the teacher shortage. That's how I'm dealing with it and trying to help my school community.
I have one final question for you. What made you choose? I know you said would help. What made you choose your area? What made you choose that grade level?
That grade level. That's a good question. I wish I had, this super inspirational answer of what made me choose middle school. Um, but originally, when I came out of college, I really did want to be a high school teacher. That's really what I wanted. But unfortunately, when I came out, there really weren't any positions for an English teacher on Staten Island in a high school. And it forced me to have to start looking elsewhere. And I went on interviews, and then eventually I met my principal, and I really was very comfortable with her just from the very beginning. I think we just had a very good mutual understanding of like an educational vision. And it just so happened that it was a middle school. And I said, you know what? It wasn't exactly what I was anticipating for myself, but I'm happy I landed here. I'm happy that I'm where I am. My school is very intimate. We only have a population of about, normally, like pre-pandemic, we only have about 1,300 kids. It's not that much. There's only about 150 teachers, so everybody kind of knows everybody. It's very cozy, it's intimate. The kids know you even if they don't have you as a teacher, because we make our presence known in the hallway when they're passing from class to class. Like, we'll say good morning to them whether they are our student or not. And that's just the type of environment that we have. We try to make it very friendly and welcoming and warm, especially for our sixth grade, because our sixth grade, they come in like deers in the headlights every year. So it's an adjustment for them. But it's so amazing because middle school is such pivotal years in a kid's life. And, you meet them as sixth graders and then you watch them become eighth graders. And when they leave completely, entirely different than the way they came in. And that's like the beauty of middle school, I think, because, the same experience happens in high school, but it's a different type of experience. Like ninth grade versus 12th grade, I think is a much more different animal than sixth to eighth grade. So those are just really special years, I think, for a teenager and for a kid in general. And I'm happy to be a part of those years.
I actually have a question about licensing. Uh,
Sure.
Before you said that you got a teaching job right after your bachelor's. So can you get your license in your like during your bachelor's?
That's right. You can. And a lot of the CUNY schools, City University of New York, that's what CUNY is, in case anybody doesn't know. CUNY will guide you. So when I was in the teaching program at CSI, they gave us a guideline of, these are the steps that you should take. These are how you should spread out the exams that you have to take, because there are written exams that you have to take and pass. And each test does cost money. So if you take the test, then you pay the money to take a test and you fail, you then have to go back and repay that amount again to retake the test. So it's recommended that you spread all of that out. So you, number one, give yourself enough time to study. Number two, make sure that you have the finances to actually do it, because these tests are not cheap. The written exams are, I believe, $120, and the Ed TPA is $300. Are you like actually considering teaching?
Yes, I want to be a teacher. Like when I'm older, I want to be a high school world history teacher.
High
But
school world history. Okay. I mean, Deborah, I would be more than happy to help you in any ways I can. Do you want to know about the tests?
actually I wanted to ask so you can get your license during your bachelor's, but do you
Yes.
still does like after you get your job, does your school still require you to get your master's?
Yes. That
Okay.
is New York State. That has nothing to do with the school that you're working in. That is a state regulation that any teacher that gets hired, in New York State with a bachelor's degree, from that point on, that you get from the time you get hired, you have 5 years to complete that master's degree. And they keep track on you. If they find out that you never finished that master's degree, you could lose your job. Okay, so things are always, changing and evolving with the tests. When I was going to be a teacher, there were several written tests. So the first test was what's something called the ALST. An ALST stands for Academic Literacy Skills Test. That's what it means. And that test was just reading comprehension. They want to make sure that you could read a passage and be able to answer questions about that passage. So it's a lot of what you guys are doing now as students in ELA, right? You read and you talk about what you read, right? So that test was the first one I took. And I really didn't have a problem with that one because I was an English person. So that wasn't something that was like a challenge for me. They ended up getting rid of that test. So that test is no longer needed to become a teacher. And they had reasons for why they took it away. Um, so the second test they took was something called the CST, Content Specialty Test. Being that my content was English, I took it in my content. I took it you know, in English. I passed that one because again, that was my specialty. I know my stuff. I was going to college for several years at that point, so I already had a good English background at that point.
So every CST would be specific to that part, that student's major.
Right. So, like for instance, Mr. Robert, Rich, I didn't say hi to you or introduce myself, but hi. You know, Mr. Robert was world history, so he probably took his, CST in history because that's his specialty.
Yeah,
So,
and from what I remember from that entire process, it was they had multiple. Well, first off, they had multiple history tests you could take because there's multiple content specialties for it.
the CST was the second test I took. Then there was another test called the EAS exam. Now that stands for Educating All Students. So now this test is really supposed to, be able to show whether or not you can demonstrate how you would react in certain situations, particularly with certain populations of students. So how would you handle students with special needs? How would you handle students that are multilingual learners? How would you deal with students who have different learning levels? Because essentially we're all different. The way that I learn something might not be the way Mr. Robert learns it. He might learn it entirely different, but neither one of us are wrong. We just have different ways of seeing it and learning it and processing that information. So the most difficult task as a teacher is to make sure that you meet the needs of all your learners that are sitting in front of you because they're all different. You're dealing with so many different personalities too, as well. And then the last test, which is what I mentioned earlier, is something called the EdTPA. Now, the EdTPA is a portfolio, so it is not a written test. It is not, anything that you do in a building or in front of a computer. Your EdTPA is solely based on your student teaching performance. So all the lessons that you're writing during your student teaching, the EdTPA asks you to come up with 3 to 5 lessons of your own, and you have to answer a series of prompts and questions about the lessons that you designed. That is for, in the part, there's 3 tasks in the EdTPA. Task 1 is called the planning task. That's where you talk about your lessons and you talk about your reasoning for why you plan the lesson the way you did. Okay. The second part of the test is the video. So you have to do a video of yourself, which gets sent to the state. And people from the state sit around at this big table and they watch your tape. And they determine whether or not this is somebody who is a fit to be in front of a class. Because the EdTPA is what determines whether or not you get your license. So that's the hardest part of, getting through this certification process, because you make it all the way to the end after all those written tests. But if you don't really show in person on tape that you're a good teacher, if they have any reason to believe that you're not a good teacher at all, okay, they will fail you for the EdTPA and you will not get your license.
Some of you, many of you probably know me already because I have worked with some of you or been in the classroom with you with UAU. I'm Rob Grasso. I do a lot of work with UAU, and I'll get to my history in a little bit. But I did go into college to teach. I focused on education as my bachelor's. I did a second major at the time, but they usually called them minors back then. I think they're probably still called minors now, but I did my
They are still called minors now.
Yeah. And I work in a college too, spoiler alert. But the minor was in history, was in social studies. I went in knowing I wanted to teach. I landed with, at the time, it was 7 to 12 grade, because that's how they used to clump them together. And the reason why was mostly because I just felt more comfortable with 7th to 12th graders versus younger students, kindergarten, first, fifth, and so on. Um, cut my teeth through that. And for when you're doing a major, when you're trying to go into history with education, education should be the main major. Um, Making sure social studies or regular history is your minor is actually a good way to start, especially for your bachelor's. That's like the first bit of advice I can bring in. Now, I went to a private school. I went to Iona College up in New Rochelle, which is upstate, about an hour's drive. I actually dormed there. Um, do I need a background in education to go into higher education? That's a good question. When you say higher education, Ariba, are you referring to teaching college level? Because if it's college level, no, you don't. If you mean like, yeah, so college level, you don't. It helps, but like, and this actually was kind of going into my path because I thought, oh no, what am I going to do? So I then spent 4 years doing a master's just in pure history, learning the trade there. And with that, you would pick a content specialty. You would work 3.5 to 4 years. First, just individual classes on the master's level. And for those who don't know, master's program is very small, specialty driven classes where you're expected to read essays and write essays pretty much like clockwork for 15 weeks. And we're talking like 20, 30-page essays, by the way. Don't freak out yet. You still have to go through everything you need to with your bachelor's. And you learn some of those skills while you're in college anyway. So I actually was planning on changing my focus because I was originally going in for the high school, originally going in for that. That wasn't available. So now I was thinking, okay, history opens up the doors a little bit. I can now focus on teaching in college level. I can now go into different fields like museum work, curation, things like that, research and development, different things. And when I finished that, I kind of lucked out because I was sending out my resume now. And I was given the chance to become an adjunct professor. So now I work at a couple of different schools, including the College of Staten Island as an adjunct, where I teach civics, history, economics, a little bit of sociology. It runs kind of the gamut. You don't need the background in education to go into there. Usually what you need to honestly, what you really need to teach at higher education is minimum a master's degree in whatever field you're studying to do. So if you want to do English, you need a master's degree in some sort of English content. Same thing with history, same thing with math, science, whatever the case may be. And that also includes education, because there are other jobs outside of teaching in the classroom when we're talking about like the education field. That could also be kind of what my secondary job is with UAU now, which is content creation. Peer evaluations is a very common practice in that regard. Kind of like how sending in your tape is almost like sending in a resume now for that test that Valerie was talking about. But now you're doing it live time with the teacher in your class while you're teaching your class. So pressure is on a little bit more. And in a lot of ways, personally for me, in a lot of ways, I prefer that because, teaching is kind of, and this is where you don't become disposable, going back to the adjunct a little bit, because teaching is very good when you actually have people who really get it. And get it is very vague, and it's vague on purpose because it could be it's very different for everybody else. I see there's a couple of questions. Deborah, do you have to take the written tests your final year of your bachelor's? I actually took those written tests the final year of my bachelor's, so I don't know if it has changed or not when it comes to like the college situation, but that's when they were offered. Now they offer them like every year. They offer them at certain times for those written tests, so you really have to like do your own groundwork to kind of, be on top of that. Usually you can have help from advisors, especially from the education departments.
And no, unfortunately, student teachers do not get paid. I am very sorry to inform you, but they don't.
Yeah, I was about to get into that. In fact, the way student teaching worked for me, and I see a couple of more questions coming in that I want to get to for sure. The way it worked for me is like my senior year in college, the first semester we did. So this would be like the fall semester in college. We had what was called the colloquial courses. So what the education department did then was you had only 2 education classes that you had to take, plus whatever your content specialty was, if you declared one. Those 2 education classes, one of them would be your your student teaching, your internship, if you will, where you actually have to go to for my case, 2 different schools. So I actually went to 2 different schools, one high school, one middle school. And for the entire 15 weeks up until Christmas break, I was their student teacher for like 5 to 6 weeks, just doing things like that.
Thing I want to tell you all is that when you go to school in college, 9 out of 10 degrees that you are going to be receiving, you are going to have an internship or
Field work.
teaching, field work, some sort of hands-on training experience that you are going to have to receive in order to graduate and get that degree. That will probably be your final year, your final semester. It will be kind of like your last requirement for you to get that diploma. No, you are not going to be paid for it, but it will be part of your classes, and there will be some sort of paper attached to it, or case notes, or EdTPA, or depending on the degree and major, what they are going to call it. But there 9 out of 10 times is some sort of field work attached to a degree.
I wanted to just add one thing before I get, because there's a lot of questions in the chat I probably got to get to still, but I did want to add one thing on top of what Ms. Valerie was saying regarding the passion. And I actually say this to students all the time who ask me, should I become a teacher? And the first thing I always say is no, which I know sounds weird, but I say no because there's a big catch. It's no, unless if you know you really want this. And when I say you really want this, as I said before, it can be a very thankless job. There'll be a lot of hardships. It'll be a lot of work. Sometimes you'll be working extra hours. Ms. Valerie said she was up till like 1 a.m. doing lesson plans. That's not unusual. I have made lesson plan, I'm so used to like making like versions of lesson plans, and the format of it changes each year. It's almost second nature now. But when I started, it would take me hours just to get every little nuance right. So starting with Deborah again, you said to take education as your major in your bachelor's and the subject you want to teach as your master's. But what if you flipped it? What if I'm assuming is what you're going into. What if my major in the college I'm attending is social studies? Should I change it to education solely? That really does depend on what you're going for, Deborah. I said education is the major for the bachelor's with the subject as a minor. Mostly because I felt that would be the best path forward to become a very specific teacher. And in this case, it was a specific teacher that would teach in the high school level, a teacher that could work with students. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. Specifically for education, if you want to go, and I'll just say this, if you want to go into teaching right away with everything that Ms. Valerie was talking about, education as your major should be the path forward. And if you do want to do a high school, I would recommend picking a content specialty, whether it's social studies, math, science, whatever it may be.
Basically for the school that I'm looking at right now, like I said in the thing, it says, well, the major I chose was social studies 7 to 12. So I'm guessing that implies
Education, yes.
Education, exactly. So then for my master's, would I just do history again?
That again, that really would depend on what you're looking for. Are you looking to teach just high school? Are you looking to do higher education? I'm trying to remember.
I just want to do high school, but I could do college too. It doesn't really matter to me.
Then my suggestion, because you have a while to think about for your master's, my suggestion honestly would be to explore both. Look into like what it would take for a history master's, what it would take for an education master's, maybe or whatever other content or subject you want to go into. Maybe you'll learn like maybe I don't really want to do social studies while you're taking the social studies, and then you can use your master's to focus on a different subject as well. That could change it. I've seen that actually happen with a lot of my peers who I graduated with. A lot of them went in thinking, let's go into education, let's become teachers. Very few of them actually came out becoming the teacher they thought they were when we started. Some of them were like, I want to be a math teacher. Now they're teaching English. It really will depend. And the good news is you do have time to think about this and to explore those options. And there are people that are in those fields, people that are actually at the colleges you may be applying to, that could better answer those questions as well. They can give you their experiences, what they felt would work for them, what they feel would maybe work for you. You can get opinions from other teachers as well. But the best advice I can definitely give for it right now is that you have options. I would explore them all and see what best fits for you. I see a bunch of other questions, so just to bring them out. Um, Santa, internships for student teaching are required, just to let you know. Again, they're usually baked into the curriculum, especially for the college level. So if you are like, let's say, like use what I did, like, so to become an actual teacher to help get your initial certification, you had to do the student teaching to get your bachelor's degree. You have to do all the tests, as Miss Valerie talked about, for basically getting in the door, and then you need to eventually get a master's degree to maintain that. From Janira asked an interesting question. How does being an how does being an educator allow you to spend more time on the things that you're passionate about? How happy is your inner nerd when you're teaching? For me, it's always happy. I have a very sunny disposition, at least in my head, 9 times out of 10. As far as more time on things that I'm passionate about, a lot of that actually boils down to how do you keep those passions going in a lot of ways. Like, where can you bring it into what you talk about with your class, for example, or how can you relate it to students? So I am a big nerd. I love a lot of different things, and you can use those things to try and bring down up a point in class. Whether I'm using like different historical references that are like trying to talk about like civics or economics, whether I'm using something I know very well, like a hobby of mine, like let's say video games or something like that, to try and bring up how certain things work, how certain things look, what we expect, what we see. Games like Civilization. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of those, or Europa Universalis, which are these like strategy style games that are all about setting up your own kingdoms or your own like countries or nations or things like that. Those in their own ways are sometimes teaching tools because they can showcase how that stuff works. And sometimes the best way to learn and experience that is through getting your hands dirty, literally by playing the game. College is weird where I can experiment and do a lot of different things with my classes within a certain framework. So I can do videos, I can do lectures, I can do sort of like mock UN type of games in class, anything like that to help get the point across. That's how you can keep that passion alive. But there's different ways that you can get around that. How you talk about, how you showcase your lessons, how you resonate with students is where that can come into play. So what you love, whether it's your hobbies or, what you love in your work life, is how you can keep that inner nerd happy all the time. And that also ties into just the passion about teaching. You'll know you really like it when a bad day doesn't really affect you that much. I can say unequivocally, it does not matter where you get your degree from. The places that look for like Harvard or things like that are usually places that most people won't even be looking for a job in most fields. We're talking like really high level, hardcore, businesses type of things. For those that are going into the business sector, it doesn't really matter as much anyway, because whatever degree, whatever things you're going in, you're getting, your application, your work, and how you prove yourself with your resume is much more important than where you got your education. Same thing for teaching, same thing for social work, same thing for all of these jobs, really. Very few places really care about whether you went to Harvard or whether you went to the College of Staten Island. They only care about if you can do the job, if you're qualified for the job, and how are you qualified for the job? And are you going to be somebody who'll be a good fit? I can't see myself being anything other than a teacher. And I can't really see myself enjoying any other job more than teaching. And that's where that passion does lie. If there's one thing to take away from all this discussion, it is that point. If you really want it, if you really have that passion, stick with it. It'll be difficult, but it will be rewarding in a way that goes beyond just the finances or the days off or anything else that comes with it, or the camaraderie with teachers.